Section E of the residential listing agreement is going to discuss the MLS. A huge portion of the MLS information has actually been removed from the residential listing agreement and put on its own addendum, the MLSA, or the Multiple Listing Service Addendum. So on the actual listing agreement, all you're going to really fill in there on E1 is the agent's primary MLS, and then if they have any other additional MLS that they may be a part of, and including the listing on. E2, it would just be if the seller wants to not use photographs, except for those that are required by the MLS, they would check that box. If you actually go to the paragraphs 11A, it goes more in depth over it. It just discusses by default that in order to effectively market the property for sale, it is often necessary to provide photographs, virtual tours, and other media to buyers. So unless you check the box, the seller is agreeing that the broker and others may photograph or otherwise electronically capture images of the exterior and interior of the property for static and or virtual tours of the property by buyers and others for the use on broker's website, the MLS, and other marketing materials and sites. It goes on even further of that information. But in short, all that information really is being moved over to the multiple listing service addendum. And so let's discuss that form in itself real quick. The MLSA, it's going to talk about what is an MLS, what information is being provided to the MLS, the benefits of using an MLS, benefits or the impact of opting out of using an MLS if that's what the seller chooses. Public marketing of the property coming soon. In paragraph 3D, the default verbiage is that the broker is going to begin to market the property to the public on the beginning of the listing period. So if you recall, that is actually the date listed in 2A1 that we discussed. So by default, that date, that begin date, is when the property should be going on market, unless you check that box on the MLSA D2 where you're choosing to market to the public on a separate date, or if they check the box 3 where it's just saying the seller instructs the broker not to market the property to the public. You could, I think one of the biggest things that people are really looking at this form is actually paragraph 5, where it is discussing what are seller concessions. And simply put, it's monetary payments that a seller agrees to contribute towards a buyer's expenses and other costs that a buyer may be responsible for in a transaction. And the reason why that is important is now because by default, the buyer is going to be responsible for paying their own agent or their own broker. So concessions may include, but are not limited to, the cost of escrow or title, lender fees, repairs, inspections, and of course, the buyer broker compensation. Any concessions identified in the MLS listings are not promises to pay, but instead indicate to the buyer that the seller is willing to consider offers asking for concessions. Any concessions specified in the MLS must be allowed to be used for any permissible buyer expense or cost and must not specify the concessions are to be used for broker compensation. Really, it's basically just saying that the MLS, some MLSs may or may not allow it. So again, There isn't just a flat consistency that, yes, it's going to allow you to mark on your MLS that they will allow you to say that seller is accepting concessions or not. It's going to vary from MLS, especially while we are all trying to figure out this new process. So yours may offer it, yours may not, but you need to have the conversation with the seller of what a concession is and what does that mean and what does your MLS allow or not allow. By default, 5B is saying that the seller does not authorize the broker to put in the MLS that the seller is willing to consider offers asking for concessions. That is the default verbiage. So if you and the seller are like, nope, I do want it absolutely advertised in the MLS that I am willing to consider offers asking for concessions, make sure you guys check that box of 5B2. Otherwise, you are not following the contract if you do end up putting in that MLS that they're willing to consider concessions when the paperwork doesn't back that up. And then again in paragraph 6, we're kind of going back to that whole photography and videos and things. It by default is saying that visitors are not restricted from taking pictures of the property. So if the seller does want to have that restriction, 6B2 needs to be checked. That is how all that I'm going to go over on the MLSA. Really, I feel like from a listing agent perspective, you should really be able to read through that and truly understand everything that it is discussing, as well as what is the default verbiage on it and versus what boxes you may or may not need to check depending on what the seller wants for their listing. And it's a big one for sellers to review and go over as well.